My testimony concerns the sacred status of Mauna Kea in general, and with particular reference to two ahu, altars, constructed on the proposed TMT site in June of 2015, and the implication of these ahu for the permitting process. I would like to open by making reference to a stated goal of the permit applicant as found in the CDUA at 2.3.2, page 2-4, in the section entitled Historic Cultural Resources. It reads in part, quote, "Protection of historic and cultural resources has been a major objective in the planning of the proposed TMT project," end quote. My primary aim is not to challenge the degree to which the applicants addressed historic and cultural resources adequately in the CDUA up to the point it was published. Others have addressed those concerns. My point is to insist that religious life on the mountain has been catalyzed, magnified, and otherwise intensified since the time of the CDUA. This is true of religious activity on the mountain in general, and is specifically true of religious practices at the proposed TMT site itself. These reasons, I will argue, warrant review and revision of the CDUA and the accompanying EIS, with particular attention to consultation with affected practitioners and those they serve. My testimony is offered with specific reference to criteria number 5 and number 8 that govern the CDUA process. Criterion number 5 includes the following language, quote, "The proposed land use will be compatible with the locality and surrounding areas and to the physical conditions and capabilities of the specific parcel or parcels," end quote. I have attended to criterion number 5 for the reason that the CDUA addresses cultural beliefs and practices with reference to it, finding anticipated impacts to be, quote, "less than significant." My analysis also pertains to criterion number 8, which reads, quote, "The proposed land use will not be materially detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare." As a scholar of indigenous religions, I urge the hearing officer and the board to recognize the ways this criterion is of direct relevance to this contested case in terms of significant impacts on the psychological, social, and ultimately physical well-being of Native Hawaiian traditional practitioners, principally through traumatic injuries that would be caused by having a sacred site significantly impacted. And indeed, we heard a good deal about this over the last few days. First, I wish to add to my perspective and opinion to those who have testified before me regarding the sacredness of Mauna Kea to members of the Native Hawaiian community. Whether considered from within Hawaiian tradition or in a comparative perspective with reference to other religious landscapes around the world, there is no question as to the sacred character of Mauna Kea. It is quite literally the very ground of Hawaiian tradition, its stories, practices, and prayers. It has long been a nexus point where place, humans, and otherworldly energies are understood to converge and commune. In specifically Hawaiian terms, it is a vahipana, sacred place, where ancestral memories, present actions, and future intentions fuse. It is a kula'iwi, a homeland, in the most palpable sense, a place where humans, bones, and spirits traverse time and dimensionality. It is a place of heightened kino lau expressions of form and embodiment, where the most ancient of Hawaiian stories live on in the actions of those who seek to protect Mauna Kea. Beyond looking at history, oral tradition, and academic reports, as a scholar of religion, when attempting to discern what is sacred to a community, I ask, what do they choose to protect? With what commitment and by what means? On Mauna Kea, the commitments of the community stand out in stark relief and in strongly religious ways, including through sustained and exacting ritual activities and occupation of the mountain. Their primary means of protecting Mauna Kea have been through a nonviolent ethic, kapu aloha, and through ceremony, including offerings, prayer, song, dance, and chants. Witnessing the protectors in action on the morning of June 24th, 2015, I was immediately struck by their level of conviction, engagement, and their deeply traditional sensibilities and comportment. As a concrete example of the religious nature of the protest actions, consider the following. On June 24th, as the DLNR officers approached, rather than scatter or react with violence, Lakea Trask, a young cultural practitioner, led his line of protectors in a traditional group purification chant. Such chanting continued all morning, framing the event as one of sacred duty. One chant in particular stood out, an ancient Puli Huikala, a group chant, Hemu Oya. Historically intoned during the consecration of temples and during other heightened religious moments, such as the opening of the Opelu season, this chant cleanses, purifies, and wards off threats. In English, the core of Hemu Oya goes thus: defend us from them. Defend us from nightmares, from things in the night and ill omens. Free us. Not incidentally, Hemu Oya was also chanted at the TMT site on June 22nd, 2015, as a group of Native Hawaiian religious practitioners prepared themselves to build and consecrate the first of 2 ahu on the site. This group included Mr. Freitas, who oversaw construction of the ahu in his capacity as an expert in traditional and customary rockwork, and who carries a deep responsibility to care for the site. I addressed the ahu and my experiences regarding them in my WDT. Here I would like to summarize the key points of testimony relative to the CDUA and the EIS that stands behind it. The ahu constructed in ceremony now stand as material focal points of living Hawaiian tradition and also as dense symbols of Mauna Kea's sacredness to members of the Native Hawaiian community. In order to establish this point, I will here unpack a few ideas regarding the idea of tradition briefly. Tradition is not a thing, it is a process. Living tradition draws upon the past, but is necessarily constituted in the present. Living traditions are of this world, not only with reference to time, but also with regard to context. The constituent parts of traditions cannot be disarticulated from on-the-ground circumstances. This means traditional practices take place always and everywhere in moments configured by political and legal realities. Food for thought. There is no religious practice that takes place outside of a jurisdiction of some kind. Thus, tradition cannot be meaningfully described without historical, cultural, geographic, political, and legal contextualization. Likewise, in order to be protected, as the State of Hawaii Constitution demands, 12-7, tradition must be recognized and protected in specific places, times, and jurisdictions. In Hawaii, as in many indigenous contexts, sacred places are often left unto themselves out of deference to their power and sanctity. If threatened, however, the opposite dynamic is triggered as practitioners exercise their kuleana responsibility to care for the sacred. Traditional Hawaiian religious practices should be understood in this manner in the past and present. As is well known, many heiau and ahu were historically constructed in moments of struggle. In such moments, ancestors, deities, and other forces were called upon to assist the people trying to protect them. Aspects of Hawaiian religious life today follow this pattern. Tradition is manifest in action when catalyzed by circumstances, most especially when the very ground of tradition itself is threatened. Sacred places, places regarded as having ties to oral traditions, healing, burial, and worship practices, thus receive focused attention precisely when they are threatened. This is how I understand expressions of living tradition on Mauna Kea today, and it is the framework for my opinion that the ahu, the altars, constructed on the TMT proposed site in days immediately prior to the mass protest of June 24th, 2015, are expressions of living Hawaiian tradition and deserve protection as such. Acting in a traditional manner, a group of Native Hawaiian ritual practitioners constructed 2 ahu and conducted ceremony at them. Subsequently, these same practitioners, and especially William Freitas, have taken on the responsibility to care for these religious sites through ministering to them with regular offerings and ceremony. In this way, tradition has been sustained on Mauna Kea and is an expression of deeply held traditional beliefs, evidence of sincere religious action in a moment of crisis. Therefore, based on my reading of the relevant documents and on my understanding of the facts, the hearing officer and the BLNR appear to be faced with a choice. Either disregard the Ahu as instances of living Hawaiian tradition and thus allow the EIS and CDUA to stand mute with reference to them, or acknowledge the Ahu as significant expressions of tradition, considering them and the communities who worship at them to be relevant to this proceeding. If the latter view is taken, then the demands of due process should trigger reconsideration of Section 3.2 of the EIS. The EIS states that the proposed site contains no Ahu other than, quote, one near the end of the four-wheel drive road in Area E, end quote. That is not making reference to the two that I am making reference to. The EIS also quotes Ed Stevens at 3.23-15, who is reported to have said, quote, the site that they picked is free of bona fide historic treasures, end quote. It is important here to state the obvious. The authors of the EIS were able to reach this conclusion because the Ahu did not exist on the site at the time the EIS was written. Simply put, the Ahu, now undeniably present, were not accounted for in the determination of no significant impact, or less than significant impact. Were the telescope to be built on the planned site, this would entail removal of the now present Ahu. Here, 3.1.2 of the EIS is relevant. Quote, thresholds used to determine level of impact, end quote. It notes that HRS section 11-200-12 provides 13 significance criteria against which an action is to be evaluated in order to assess its potential action. Numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5 are particularly germane here. Number 1 reads, quote, involves an irrevocable commitment to loss or destruction of any cultural resource. Number 2 reads, quote, curtails the range of beneficial uses of the environment, end quote. Number 4 substantially affects the cultural practices of the community or state. Number 5 substantially affects public health. Based on the sections of the EIS I have underscored, the EIS itself designates contemporary Ahu construction as traditional and customary practice that should trigger assessment, and acknowledges that destruction of such a site would constitute a, quote, significant impact. Concluding now. Here I would like to turn from the EIS to the CDUA. If the Ahu are considered to be significant manifestations of living Hawaiian tradition, then the CDUA itself needs to be revisited, particularly with reference to 4.1.4, in which Ahu construction and the leaving of offerings are described as traditional practices, and 4.2.1, which reads in part, quote, the project is not anticipated to significantly impact the resources available on Mauna Kea used for traditional and customary Native Hawaiian rites involving pilgrimage, prayer, shrine construction, and offerings, end quote. These changes are significant and should be accounted for in the permitting process. In other words, a lot has happened since those papers were filed, and a responsible permitting process should account for them. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples holds out such an ideal, and the United States is a signatory to that document. As a scholar of religion, it is my opinion that the Ahu are significant sites of cultural belief and practice on a mountain generally held to be sacred by many Hawaiians. On this basis, I respectfully urge the hearings officer and the BLNR to require the permit applicant to revise and resubmit relevant sections of the EIS and CDUA in the interest of due process. Thank you.